Over time, Israel started having to contend at different levels with the reality of multiple Jewish denominations with profound ideological differences. Relations with diaspora Jewry, particularly in the U.S., force Israel to reckon with a large majority of Jews who identify with the liberal denominations. There is also a growing demand on both the political and legal fronts to allow progressive Judaism to participate in the Israeli arena. Beyond that, progressive Judaism has had an undeniable intellectual influence on Israeli Judaism, including in the Orthodox world, primarily in the realm of gender equality. The question of how successfully Israel has coped with these developments is debatable. Some will conclude that since Reform synagogues are empty, progressive Judaism's attempts to gain a foothold in Israel can be written off as a failure. Others will track the growing number of Israelis who identify with progressive Jewry and see it as the beginnings of a success.
Hello and welcome. My name is Shmuel Rosner and I'm a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute. Our guest today is Professor Tzvia Walden.
Yeah, spelled with W though, W-A, but pronounced Walden.
She is a psycholinguist from Ben Gurion University in the Negev. And you wanted to do the rest of the introduction yourself. I'll just say that our topic of conversation is Jewish pluralism in Israel. And now you go.
I think that introducing myself the way I see it will make it easier to understand my positions.
Okay.
So to begin with, I'm a psycholinguist. Actually, I've been studying language acquisition in Hebrew. That makes me the luckiest person on earth.
Of course.
Because there's always a mystery about how children acquire language, but there is even a bigger mystery about how the Hebrew language came back to being a mother tongue. Some people think that the Hebrew language was dead and that it was revived. But I know that it has never, ever died.
It never died.
Right? But it had stopped being, since the second century, it stopped being a mother tongue. So it was used for every other purpose, except that there was no mother who would wake up the kids and say, Boker Tov, good morning, in Hebrew. And about 100, 120, 130 years ago, Hebrew became again a mother tongue. People think that the fame goes to Eliezer ben Yehuda, but my research shows that the fame goes to a group of young women who were kindergarten teachers, and actually they made it happen.
So they made Hebrew a mother tongue
Again. They made Hebrew revive as a mother tongue in the sense that they were teaching the children, although none of them was born in Israel. None of them had Hebrew as a native language for itself. None of them, as a matter of fact, even wanted to become a kindergarten teacher. But they were the best students, and they were women engaged and committed, and they wanted Hebrew to become, again, a mother tongue. So they started teaching the children, and I wrote a whole book about how this happened. So I'm really a lucky woman.
And part of the research that we had for our book on Israeli Judaism shows that Hebrew is one of the miracles that make Israeli Judaism tick. Israeli Jews listen to Hebrew music more than anything else.
Absolutely. So I think the reason I wanted to introduce myself is it's important to me that people understand how lucky I am, in the sense that I have a double research. I researched children, the way they acquire their mother tongue on one hand, and on the other hand, I researched how Hebrew became a mother tongue. So I'm a lucky woman. And of course, this sends me back to the sources. Because how did it actually happen that Hebrew became a second time a mother tongue, and it has not happened to any other language in the whole wide world? Although people did try, and the explanation is the sources, the text, the Jewish text. So my Judaism, my pluralistic Judaism, passes through the text.
And just to mention some of your other credentials when it comes to pluralistic Judaism, you're one of the founders of a pluralistic Beit Midrash, a place of study, Kolot.
Right, voices, right?
Right, and you are a board member in Bina, a pluralistic secular yeshiva.
Absolutely.
And you are a member of a Reform synagogue in Tel Aviv, Beit Daniel.
Absolutely. And I thought that if I explain each of these positions, it would be easier to understand afterwards the kind of Jewish pluralism that I see happen in Israel.
Okay,
I
so
think
what would you like to start with?
we are in a critical moment in the history of the Jewish people, really. I mean, 70 years, my father always used to say, when say something would make me nervous.
You refer to your father. Maybe we should be kind to our listeners and explain that
It
your
will
father...
come in a minute.
Oh, okay, so you'll say who your father is.
But whenever I used to say something irritated me or made me nervous, my father said, hey, remember, are you judging the 70 last years of the history of the Jewish people? Or do you remember that we have a long, long history? And so I was born in a kibbutz, which is important. As a matter of fact, the kibbutz is called Alumot. My father, once again, Shimon Peres, used to say that this is the most beautiful place on earth because it's Galilee, and you can see the Tiberias lake, and you can see Mount Hermon, you can see the Jordan, you can see practically everything. And I said, well, how do you know it is the most beautiful place on earth? And my father says, it's written. And I said, where? And he said, in Britannica. And I said, really? Is it written in Britannica? And my father said, yes. So we went to Britannica and we found out that Ben Gurion is quoted to have reported that Shimon Peres said that Alumot is one of the most beautiful places on earth.
So he was quoting quoting
Yeah,
the
Amar
encyclopedia,
Rabbi, just like the old Jewish tradition, when each rabbi quotes the rabbi that precedes him. But I think that the charm of Israel is that it has one of each. It's like it's a country of samples. We have one lake, one Dead Sea, one Mount Hermon, one Jordan River.
and some people would say also one Judaism, Orthodox Judaism,
right.
which brings us back to the topic
But
we agreed on.
But pluralistic Judaism is exactly the beautiful idea that it doesn't have to be one. That's the main idea. So you mentioned that I was among the founders of pluralistic Beit Midrash Kolot, and this is true, and it happened after Rabin was murdered. After Rabin was murdered, I was I was undergoing a serious crisis, and I felt something must have been wrong in our society if it could happen. So I was looking for something to do to reshape our leadership and to reshape our understanding of what it means to be a Jewish state. And the best way I felt would be through studying together. So this is why
So going back to the sources and studying Jewish texts.
Exactly. You don't have to accept the other person's understanding of the term, but you must be aware that a term has many senses.
And this was part of a larger movement, a larger Jewish revival, so to speak, in the mid-90s after the assassination, right?
Absolutely.
So what happened? Can you try and explain?
Yeah. What happened was that for a while, the secular part of the Jewish people in Israel and our citizens, in a way, gave priority or gave the authority to Orthodox Jews. They were the ones who would decide what kind of Bible we would read. They were the ones who would decide about the way Shabbat would look. And everything was done in order to keep peace inside the people of Israel.
So Judaism was subcontracted to the Orthodox subset in the Jewish
exactly.
Israel.
And by doing it, we actually gave up on our own tradition, but we had a very significant Jewish Hebrew tradition. I mean, for that we need to talk about Jewish, Hebrew, and Israeli. And if you try to imagine it and actually draw circles, so if we talk about Hebrew, Hebrew is being spoken by the Jewish population in Israel, but not only. As a matter of fact, I've been working many years in an Arab Jewish school, and most of our staff, Arabic-speaking staff, spoke better Hebrew than most of our Jewish staff. So Hebrew is actually the link that unites Jews and Arabs in the state of Israel.
And not long ago in one of our studies, we found that many Arabs agree that to be a real Israeli, you must speak Hebrew.
Yeah, and a beautiful Hebrew, by the way. So this is about Hebrew. Then there is Israeli. Israeli is, to me, everyone who was born here and decided to accept the choice, because actually you could be born in one place and yet move to another place. I mean, we're praising it when we talk about Jewish diaspora making aliyah. We even call it aliyah in the sense that, so we praise it, but people could move from one place to the other. But if you're born here and you decide to live here and stay here, for me, you're Israeli. And then, of course, there is Jewish. And Jewish unites us and Jews all over the world. I've been traveling quite a lot and visiting many congregations, and I remember this wonderful sense. You walk into a room, you'd never met anybody there, and 5 minutes afterwards, they're your brothers and sisters. And I think that's wonderful. And I don't know of many diasporas who actually are so committed, so engaged, and feel so united. So for me, Jewish is our way to keep the Jewish people not only inside Israel, but outside throughout the world. And I'm so proud that we could do it. I don't want to lose it.
Now let's ask a somewhat more difficult question, because we know that Jewish pluralism is somewhat controversial in Israel. There are many people who think that all we need is just one type of Judaism, or that if we have more than one stream of Judaism in Israel, there will be a split between different groups. So how do you answer these concerns?
So once again, I'll go back to my experience. I grew up in a kibbutz, but even in the kibbutz movement, there were shades. There were different kibbutz movements. Some kibbutz movements were very much against anything that had to do with Judaism. But I belong to the kibbutz movement that's associated with Berel Katzenelson, who was a philosopher. I've been teaching for many years in Beit Berel College. This is the Arab Jewish college I was mentioning. And of course, we relate to text and to tradition with a lot of respect and engagement. Respect in the sense that we respect other people, even though they behave totally different, because I'm secular, I'm atheist, as a matter of fact. But
you're an atheist, you know that most Jewish Israelis aren't atheists. Most Israeli Jews do believe in God.
I know, but I have a special relationship that he betrays me and I betray him.
Okay.
So I can afford to qualify myself sometimes. I mean, I don't believe there's anything in the sky, but I do believe in a notion of Kadosh Baruch Hu, or God, or whatever, in order to create intimate relationships between Jewish destiny and myself. Now, so I grew up with a lot of respect to Judaism, with a special relationships to text, but with no practice whatsoever of halacha.
Right.
Until I met my husband. And he grew up in an Orthodox family.
So he knew a lot about abiding by halachic rules.
Right. So, I mean, how are we going to build a family together? What kind of education are we going to offer our children, since Israel has made a very crucial wrong decision to segregate its education, which is an issue we're not going to go into, but I think, by the way,
There are
this is
different educational streams in Israel for religious people and
Exactly.
secular people.
exactly this segregation.
So one of the things you think are necessary is to let more religious and less religious Israelis study together Jewish texts or celebrate together Jewish holidays?
I think Israel should let whoever is an Israeli citizen go to the same educational stream and then separate at specific points should they like. Some will go make yoga, some will go make meditation, some will go pray, some will go...
I'll just take a break. I'll go to the cafeteria.
Well, no, I think that living together makes you a better person.
Let's go back to practicing pluralistic Judaism in
Okay.
Israel. What does it entail?
So when I met my husband, we had to make up our minds as to where our children will go to school, whether they should go to the religious or to the so-called secular, because it's not
Mamlachti,
really
the
yeah.
state-mandated secular school.
Yeah, it's hard to, the term is hard to translate.
It's not
into
really
English.
secular. It's
Yeah,
it's
not
traditional
secular.
in many ways.
It's traditional, it's civil, it's state, maybe state schools, I don't know. It's not
No,
clear.
especially Americans, when they think about Israel, they misunderstand the whole point of being secular in Israel. They think secular is a separation of religion and state. But in Israeli schools, even the secular school, they do study a lot about the holidays and
Which
about
is
the
another
Torah
crucial-
and about
Definitely, you're so right.
pluralistic Judaism in Israel.
So,
What's the goal for it? To make religious Israelis more pluralistic towards other streams,
Pluralism-
or to make secular Israelis more educated about their Judaism?
So, our people is undergoing a very special experience. For the first time, we are a state and a religion and a people and a nation. And that's complicated.
It's complicated.
And to me, liberal Judaism is an excellent answer to those who do want to belong, but do not want to go by or to obey by halacha. First of all, because I'm a woman. I mean, being a woman. And I just told you before we started
So
the conversation.
orthodoxy is
When
one
I
of the
got
things you-
married, I went to our synagogue with my husband, and I was reading the Torah, preparing for getting married. And my parents were sitting there together, next to each other, right? My mother was scandalized, and my father almost fainted.
because they saw you
My mother
reading
was
from the
scandalized
Torah.
because I went on the bima wearing trousers.
Okay.
And my father almost fainted because he saw me do what he only knew his grandfather was doing, namely read the Torah in front of a big public. But Israel then was very different than it is today. At the beginning, the first people who brought the message of liberal and reform Judaism to Israel were American. And it was very American-like. They talk with a heavy accent in Hebrew.
Right.
I wish I had that accent. That's one thing. They had pluralistic American ways of taking some things for granted, although Israel is a very different segregated society, as I mentioned beforehand. And even at that time, they were more extreme than they are today. Because in some communities and in some congregations, they would even read in English the Torah, which is, for me, a no-no. I
Right.
mean, it's fine to read also in English, but
not only in
but
English.
not only. And really, I feel sorry for them. I feel sorry for having to read the Torah in English.
So you think initially this was a foreign experience for Israelis, and that's why some of them could not connect with liberal
Yes.
Judaism?
I'm 73 years old, and I got married when I was 28. So ever
It's been a
since-
while. It's been a while.
A while. And in Israeli everyday hectic kind of life, it's been accelerated. So liberal Judaism today in Israel is Israeli, not as American.
What makes
as
it Israeli? You know, I want to
Well,
push.
to begin with, a large group of young Israeli-born rabbis, men and women, to begin with. Even, as a matter of fact, I conducted a long research to find out the way female rabbis in Israel would like to be called. And it's a
A
big...
rabbah, a rabbi,
Rabbi,
a rav.
rabbanit, yeah.
And what's the answer, by the way?
It's beautiful because I did it twice, and I redid it a few years ago, and there is a change. So at the beginning, some of them would like to be called rabbah, but many others would like to be called rav, because they associated rav with authority and rabbah with a softer way of being a rabbi.
Okay.
But none of them ever accepted to be called the way Orthodox Judaism
Rabbanit,
sometimes
the
calls.
wife of the rabbi.
Because by going to bed with a rabbi, you do not become a rabbanit. I mean,
I will excuse you. I'm not sure about all rabbis, but
so none of them ever wanted to be called rabbanit, of course, but they were divided between those who wanted to
Rav
be called
and
rabbah and rabbah. And nowadays, the majority wants to be called rabbah, because nowadays rabbah is again associated with the kind of authority that comes not only from halacha, but it comes from education, from public positions, and they perform weddings, and they perform funerals, and they are all over.
do you think liberal Judaism in Israel is growing in numbers, in presence?
Oh yes, I know. Oh,
You know
yes.
that it does.
I know it is growing. Actually, we have a meeting in Shfaim, Kibbutz Shfaim, which is on the Mediterranean shore. And every time there's more and more congregations and more people who participate. And of course,
Now, who are these people that join Reform or liberal Jewish congregations?
people who do not want to accept the separation between men and women only because of sex, I mean. People who do not want to accept authority being, how should I say, monopolized by men. People who want to enjoy the nice things about Jewish tradition without necessarily obeying to halacha or mitzvot or whatever, would like to separate between everyday life practices as far as the halacha concerned, but they replace these practices by social engagement. So actually, people who would like to take from Judaism its social mitzvot, its social, how would you call mitzvot?
Well, yeah, commandments,
Commandments.
social.
So these are people who think that being Jewish engages you to care for refugees, to care for the Palestinians, to care for injustice in society, and they pick up from Judaism
Which
the social.
makes it somewhat political.
Well, what do you mean by political?
By political, you know, if we talk about, you mentioned the rights of the Palestinians, well, that's a highly controversial issue in Israel, which makes it political.
Well, if you use political to be synonymous to controversial, that's
No, but you understand what I mean.
But I don't agree. I don't agree. I think that
What it means is you basically say right-wing Israelis cannot be a part of liberal Judaism because they are not part of our...
I'm not saying so.
Okay.
No, I'm not saying so. They can find their own social engagement, and they can still be liberal. No, I don't think so. I don't accept any tagging that would prevent people from free choice. And if you say a white wing cannot be liberal Judaism, then you're preventing people who are open-minded and who are willing to be a part. And by the way, they are. there are right-wing leaders who are part of liberal Judaism, and they even pronounce themselves and manifest themselves. No, I don't think I would avoid any synonymous tagging that cuts your options, that prevents you from making actually a free choice. So everybody is welcome. And the one condition is that they wish to have Jewish texts and Jewish sources as a part of their inspiration. Not the only part, but as a part of their inspiration.
Let me share with you one of my theories and see how you respond. I think the rabbinate and the Orthodox establishment is one of the greatest assets of liberal Judaism, because this establishment is so unpopular with many Israelis. It gets you a lot of traction with the Israelis who dislike the rabbinate. So they come to you maybe even as a protest against Orthodox Judaism, which they associate with authority, coercion, etc.
It's very practical and attractive as an explanation, but I don't want anyone to come to our movement just because they dislike
someone else.
I want people to come because of a free choice and because they love something.
Last question. And this, as an observer and as someone who lives here, is Israel becoming more Jewishly pluralistic or less so in the last decade?
The reason I'm so optimistic, and I am, in spite of what's going on, is first thing, if you look at cultural renaissance in Israel. I mean, 20 years ago, music was either Ma'arav, Occident, or
Western
or
Mizrahi,
Occident, or Oriental. Nowadays, fusion is everywhere. You could go either to an Oriental restaurant or a more Ashkenazi type of a. Now it's fusion. If you open a magazine or the weekend paper, so many festivals, so much creation, so many books being written about Jewish now, about life in Israel. I mean, there is an intellectual, artistic, cultural renaissance in Israel that it's worth everything else around us.
Professor Valdan, thank you for coming.
Thank you for hosting me.